shit on the Regents exam. Back a long time ago on the Regents exam, you'd take like a set of questions, and then there was like, I don't know, 8 sections after that, and you had to choose like 4 of them, so you could like not answer certain sections. But that was a long time ago.
In the book,
they did away with that.
It says that even if you don't answer every one of the questions, there's still a chance you can get an 800.
You can get an 800 without getting every question right. That is correct.
How many questions can you get wrong?
I don't know. The scaling, it's all scaled, and it's some strange. So I don't exactly know, and I don't even think it's publicized really how those scores are arrived at, and it varies from test to test because the difficulty may vary a little bit, and so some years getting certain raw score results in an 800, another year it might not. Just kind of depends. All right.
So would you recommend skipping an answer or?
So the way the scoring works is you lose points if you get one wrong. You don't lose or gain points if you leave it blank.
Okay.
You gain points for getting it correct. And the way that the scoring works out, if you can eliminate one answer, if you say, oh, I know this is not the answer, then you're best to guess. Okay? Because between those other 3, there's a chance, in terms of probability, there's a chance that you could get it right. Versus if you skip it, the risk is there. So, if you can eliminate one, if you can eliminate 2, you definitely should guess. If you can't eliminate any, then you're better off leaving it blank. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit today at the start about energy flow through an ecosystem. And when we talk about this, we have a bunch of terminology that we use and we need to know. So autotrophs, auto means self, troph means having to do with food. These are self-feeders. They're producers. Okay? They use photosynthesis to make their own food. So generally in an ecosystem, we're talking about plants, but there are other photosynthetic organisms. And then we have the heterotrophs, organisms that are consumers. They need to find other organisms to consume in order to gain energy. Different types of consumers: herbivores, which eat only plants; carnivores, which eat only animals; omnivores, eat a combination of both; and then we have the decomposers, sometimes called saprophytes, and they break down organic matter. Okay, things like dead plants and animals, or waste released by these animals. They're called decomposers. We generally think of fungi and bacteria as the main decomposers in ecosystems, and they act sort of as recyclers of the ecosystem, breaking down this dead material and returning nutrients back into the soil so that they can be used again. We'll talk today about nutrient cycling, and they're a part of that. Just another term, detritivore. Detritus is like dead plant and animal remains, little bits of dead plants and animals that some organisms consume. Those are some of the terms that we use as we're talking about the energy flow in the ecosystem. So food chains show us sort of a direct feeding relationship from one organism which eats another, which eats another. They show the transfer of energy. Okay. In ecosystems, energy is not recycled at all. Okay. It comes in through what? Sunlight. And then it's transferred from one organism to another to another. And along the way, each time one organism consumes another, there's a loss of energy to heat and other body processes. Okay? And so energy flows one way. And these show a couple different food chains that one organism eats another. And the arrows are pointing in the direction of energy flow. And there's a term that we talk about as we talk about food chains, food webs, and that's trophic level. Again, troph means having to do with food. It's sort of where an organism lies in this food chain. So, if we have these food chains, the maple tree is a producer, the dandelion's a producer. And so this is the first level consumer, the snail, the sparrows a second level consumer, the hawk's a third level consumer. Okay, here we have the producers and then first, second, third, fourth, fifth level consumers. Okay? And that each step along the way we move up a trophic level. A food web is just a series of interconnected food chains. Okay? It's more complex. It shows organisms that have multiple food sources. Okay? So it shows this series of feeding relationships. You could identify within a food web several food chains. You could trace, phytoplankton to benthic invertebrates, to sea ducks, to bald beetle. That would be one food chain that's found in this food web. And again, some organisms might have different trophic levels depending on what they're eating. Okay? So for example, let's see, this tundra swan, it can be a first level consumer when it's eating just the vegetation directly. What is it though if it's eating the sea duck? Well, no, this would be the first level consumer. Second, this would be a third level consumer when it's eating the sea ducks. I'm generally a first level consumer. You are all sometimes first level consumers, but also oftentimes second level consumers. Have you ever been a third level consumer?
Yeah. We don't eat
Maybe.
ourselves.
When have you been a third level consumer?
You eat like a big fish.
Okay, yeah. Lots of times seafood, for example. If you eat a big bass, because they are carnivorous fish, so then you'd be higher up in that food chain. Most of the time, though, if you eat chicken or beef or pork, what are you? Second level. Those are all herbivores, and so that puts you at a second level.
So if you eat a herbivore, it's second level.
Yep.
And if you eat a plant, it's first level.
Yep. So we have predator-prey relationships. Obviously, the predator is the organism hunting other organisms, and the prey is the organism that gets killed and eaten. And the population of predators and prey follows cycle. They're dependent on each other. The more predators you have, what does that mean about the prey? The less prey. And the less prey? Less predators. So we have what's often been found to be this cyclical pattern of populations of predators and prey. This is a very famous example about the hare and the lynx that have been studied pretty extensively. Okay? And what you have, the solid line shows the population of hare, little rabbit, and the dotted line shows the population of lynx, a sort of bobcat. Okay? And what happens is they follow these patterns of increases and decreases throughout the years. And if you look at the pattern, the pattern of the hare follows up and down, up and down. The pattern of the lynx, okay, goes up and down as well. Are they in sync? What do you think? Are they perfectly in sync?
They're slightly offset.
Yeah, they're offset slightly, which makes sense, right? Because as the hare population, let's look at this section here. As the hare population goes up, okay, there's more hare available. Then there's a lag, and what happens to the lynx population? It goes up, but slightly afterwards. As the lynx population goes up, what do they start to do? Eat lots of the hare, okay, and then the hares start to fall, and they bottom out here. And then obviously, there's not as much food for the lynx, then they drop down. And so you have this sort of undulating process where you have a cycle between the predator and the prey. And it follows sort of these predictable routes. Now, why are there always more hare than lynx? The hare are not the predators, hare are the prey.
The lynx requires more energy than the rabbit because they have to eat more because the energy is not transferred as much.
Yeah. We're going to talk about this in our next. You're right. Cormac, what were you going to say?
I was going to say that lynx eats multiple hares.
Yeah, they do, which is also sort of true with what Nicolette was just saying. So,
Wait, what What did Nick want to say?
She was talking about energy flow, because like I just said, as one organism eats another, is 100% of the energy transferred? If you eat a cheeseburger, does every single calorie of that go into creating new body tissue for you? No, luckily not. Most of the energy actually gets used up. What does it get used up for? Keeping you alive, by moving and all your body processes, by keeping your body temperature elevated. Most of the energy we consume, or any animal consumes, gets used up. And only about 10% is available to be incorporated into new body tissue, to grow larger or to grow new organisms. So in all ecosystems, pretty much, the main source of energy is the sun. What can absorb that energy directly? Plants, producers, autotrophs. From there, herbivores get their energy by eating those plants. Carnivores get energy by eating the herbivores, or by eating other carnivores. But, as we were just talking about, as Nicola just talked about, every time one organism eats another, 90% of the energy consumed is actually used up for basic life processes. Only about 10% makes it up to the next level. Okay, if you think about an ecosystem, if you imagine like the savanna or something, okay? If you think about how much of each species there is, what would you find the most of? Producers, right? In any ecosystem, if you think about a forest, the most abundant organism, if you found its mass, is the producer. What's the next most abundant? Yeah, herbivores. Like you think mice or insects that eat the vegetation. There's a lot of those. If you were to gather them up and find their mass, there would be quite a few. And then as you start going up higher in your food chain, you get fewer and fewer of those. If you imagine like top carnivores that you could imagine in an ecosystem, you know, a great white shark, or a lion, or a wolf, or a hawk. You don't see large numbers of those top carnivores in ecosystems, right? You don't see flocks of hawks flying around through the sky. You don't see schools of great white sharks swimming through the ocean. You know, you don't see a herd of wolves traveling through the forest. Okay? They're generally solitary. They may live in small packs. But how many packs of wolves are in an area? Not many. They have a very large territory. Okay? So there's not many of these large herbivores. But let's say an eagle versus Canada goose. You've seen flocks of Canada geese, right? If you drive by the reservoir or something, there's hundreds of them in the reservoir. If you go golfing or something, they're all over the golf course. Their poop is all over. You got to step across it. They're maybe not much different in size, an eagle versus a goose, but there's radically different numbers of them in ecosystems. And why is that?
Because of the things that they eat.
Because what?
Because of the things that they eat.
Be more specific. Why can there be giant flocks of geese but not giant flocks of eagles?
There's more food for the
What do geese eat?
plants.
Or plants, they're herbivores. They're a first level consumer. Eagles are third or fourth level consumers. So if you think about how much energy is required to support an eagle, it's quite a bit. Okay. And that leads us to being able to create these energy pyramids that kind of visualize this for us.
What would make someone like a fourth level consumer?
It just depends on the food. So like a lot of times, are you talking about a person?
Yeah.
A lot of times it's probably fish, because in the oceans we have many smaller animals. So for example, the main sort of producers in the ocean are plankton, microscopic tiny little plants. And then you have microscopic animals that eat those plants. And then you have very, very small invertebrates or small vertebrates that eat those. And then a small fish eats those, and then a larger fish. And some of the things we eat, some of the fish we eat, tuna, salmon, bass, or trout, those are generally those are carnivorous fish. So they're higher up on that food chain. So then when you eat one of those, you would be a third or fourth or fifth level consumer. And these energy pyramids kind of visualize this. They just show that at the base of the pyramids, we always have the most biomass, the most stuff, in producers. And then each step up the food chain, we get less and less because we're losing energy to heat, to life processes, and only about 10% makes it up the next level. Okay, we could use this to,
It's so cute.
yeah, look, he's licking him.
It's
It's like a little deersicle.
Making his dinner.
So anyway,
It's so
if we
cute.
imagine this, we can do some math and sort of help us understand this. Let's say for this problem's sake, a deer of 120 pounds eats about 2,500 pounds of leaves in a year. 150-pound lion, it's a pretty small lion, eats about 25 deer in a year. Figure this out for me. How many pounds of deer does it take to feed a lion in a year? It's just some multiplication. You guys can do it. If you have a calculator, go ahead.
But I don't. Hold on. I'm in math in this.
Wait.
Hold on,
Hold
stop
on.
talking.
Yeah, let them figure it out.
Okay.
How many pounds of deer does it take to feed one lion in a year?
I'm still only up.
If we do the math,
I'm not in
120 pounds per deer times 25 deer per year that this lion is eating, about 3,000 pounds of deer.
I multiplied 2,500.
How many pounds of leaves? So then if you think about, if this lion is eating 25 deer, 3,000 pounds of deer per year, well, how many leaves does it take to support a single lion?
16,000 something, whatever Corey said.
How is my math so bad?
What school is today?
2500.
Wait, what?
Miles coming today? Don't worry about it.
Oh, there's people coming today? I hope
So
there's-
again, if we take 2,500 pounds of leaves per year for each deer, lion eats 25 deer, takes 62,000 pounds of leaves to support one lion. So again, this is why there's not hundreds of lions roaming around together, because you couldn't have an ecosystem that would have enough producers to support that many of these carnivores. It becomes even more extreme to talk about these ocean ecosystems sometimes. So if a humpback whale eats 5,000 herring, a herring eats 7,000 shrimp, a shrimp eats 130,000 microscopic diatoms per day. How many diatoms would it take to support a single whale? You could guess it's a lot, right?
Several.
Several.
At least 10.
At least, I like that.
A whale times 5,000 herrings per whale
That's a big number.
It's
times
special.
7,000 shrimp per herring times 130,000 diatoms per shrimp leaves us with a number that we will put in exponential notation. 4.55 times 10 to the 12
Hold on, I'm not done.
billion, right?
Hold on,
How
I'm not
does-
done.
How do you eat
What?
7,000 shrimp in a day? How big is a herring?
Herrings,
It doesn't-
not that
they
big,
don't
but
actually
shrimp are really teeny tiny.
Hold on, hold
Are
on.
these numbers?
I don't know how accurate these are. Yeah, the one that jumps out is the herring shrimp. It depends on the type of shrimp and the herring and how big they are and so forth. But
Alright,
the
hold on.
point is, it takes large numbers of producers to support all the levels that will support a top carnivore.
Hold on, hold on, hold on.
And, you know, when I became a vegetarian, the book that I read that prompted me to start becoming a vegetarian had a lot of information, but one of the things was about the environmental impact of where we eat on the food chain. So I eat low on the food chain as a first level consumer. If you imagine If you had an acre of land that you could grow crops on, you could grow wheat on that land, an acre of land. You could eat that wheat, make bread with it, whatever. Or if you could get a couple cows, put them on that land, they could eat the wheat, and then you could eat the cows. How could you support the most people on a single acre of land?
Bread.
The bread, right? Why can you support fewer people by feeding them beef raised on that land?
Because
It's not about the number,
mad cow
The energy
disease.
is lost.
because the energy is lost. Each step up you go, again, you're losing 90% of the energy. So, in terms of land use, in terms of fertilizer or water or things like that that are being used, it's more efficient to eat lower on the food chain.
Is that the only reason why you're a vegetarian?
No, there's a few other reasons.
Okay, but like, I still don't understand how you can
Yeah.
just like not eat meat.
It was a New Year's resolution.
Do you eat protein? Do you
1993, New Year's Day, January 1st.
Wow, there's
do you
a lot
eat
of
meat
that.
supplements?
Everyone raised
Do you eat meat supplements?
Meat supplements?
Do you eat meat supplements?
I don't exactly know what a meat supplement is.
Basically,
I eat veggie burgers.
It would be
that doesn't make
I eat chicken nuggets.
Have you been, so you've been
I eat veggie bacon. Tonight I'm having DLTs with veggie bacon. Yeah.
So you
never
so you're not
broken
in
it.
it.
Never.
Never?
Never
This is
purposely
such a
broken. I'm sure I've consumed like whatever
It's
chicken stock that I didn't know about or
It's
something.
not
But
real
I've never
bacon. It's
eaten
not made out of a
since
pig.
that day a piece of meat.
It's made out of vegetables.
Bacon is made out of pig.
It's made out of
Pigs.
things.
Made out of
Veggie
pigs.
bacon. The first part of that word should give it away.
I'm
I don't think there's
I'm having veggie BLTs tonight for dinner. It's gonna be delicious.
Yeah, soy
Bacon out of vegetables.
It's just like, I don't know. It's been so long
not
I've
bacon.
forgotten what any kind of meat tastes like, so even like veggie bacon tastes just like bacon to me. You would probably
Well,
taste it and
you don't
say,
know
oh,
what
it's
bacon
gross.
tastes
but
like.
it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Alright.
How do you get your protein?
I do eat animal products. I eat eggs, I eat dairy, I eat beans.
Okay, so
Some-
you're not
He's
a
not a-
vegan.
I'm not a vegan. My daughter is a vegan on and off.
Being a vegan is so hard
She
though.
sometimes is vegan, sometimes she's not.
Sometimes she's vegan.
Alright. But she's always vegetarian. So, getting on to ecology, we often talk about these very close relationships between two organisms. We call them symbiosis. Okay? And there's three types, and we talked about these in 7th grade. Mutualism. Do you remember what mutualism is?
They both benefit.
Yeah, mutualism is when both organisms benefit from the relationship in some way. So lots of examples of this. One that's commonly used is a termite. What do termites eat?
Wood.
They eat wood. They're one of the, well, they do eat wood. And very, very few organisms actually will eat wood. It's very difficult to digest and extract energy out of it. In fact, termites cannot extract the energy from wood. So why would they eat it? Well, inside the gut of the termite is a tiny protist that is one of the organisms that does have enzymes capable of digesting cellulose. And so they live in symbiosis, in a mutualistic relationship with these protists. And as the termites chew up and consume the wood, the protists in their gut help to digest it. The protist has an easy source of nutrition because the termite is doing all the work, eating the wood. The protist breaks it down into products that the termite can actually use. So the termite benefits from this as well. So they both benefit. This is a form of mutualism. Think about the clownfish and the sea anemone. It's a mutualistic relationship. The clownfish can hide inside of the sea anemone's stinging tentacles without being stung, giving it protection. Sea anemone gets little bits of food and stuff. It can extract nutrients out of the waste of the clownfish, so they're both benefiting. The Egyptian plover and the Nile crocodile. The Nile crocodile opens up its mouth, lets this plover, this little tiny bird, into its mouth to peck around in there. Never eats it, never chomps on it. The bird gets little bits of food out of the teeth of the crocodile, and the crocodile gets free teeth cleaning from
Oh, nice.
prevents tooth decay and loss of teeth. Yeah. So again, mutualism.
Must be kind of
Another relationship is commensalism. Commensalism is a relationship in which one organism benefits, but the other is really not affected either way. It's not harmed, but it's also not helped. It has sort of a neutral relationship. An example are barnacles that attach to the fins and body of a whale. These are barnacles, okay, tiny little invertebrates. Not so tiny, but they're filter feeders. They attach to the whale, and as the whale swims through the water, barnacles filter bits of food out of the water. They're filter feeders. They get energy. Doesn't harm the whale, doesn't hurt the whale. They're just kind of there. Sometimes the plants are also commensalism. Plants like orchids that live, epiphytes they're called. They don't grow in the soil. When I was in Costa Rica, we saw lots of epiphytes. And they don't grow in soil. They actually grow on other trees and live on other trees. They're becoming popular to put in your house. Sometimes called air plants. And then we have parasitism. In a parasitic relationship, one organism benefits and the other is harmed. Well, these are lamprey. Did I tell you about lamprey before? When I was in college, we caught lamprey in my ichthyology class.
Was that with a shaft or anything?
No, we caught them on a boat with a huge net.
We have a big net.
We hauled it in. We would catch some lake trout, and the lake trout had huge wounds in the side of them. There was no lamprey attached, but these were the sites where there were once lamprey attached. This is the mouth of a lamprey. They're jawless fish. They're very primitive fish. Their tongue is like a drill. It has teeth on their tongue. They basically suction on to the fish, drill a hole into the side of it, and then live off of its blood as it bleeds out through that hole. And sea lamprey were introduced into North America from Asia, probably in the ballast of ships coming across the ocean. And they sort of spread throughout, streams. They work their way upstream, so they're pretty nasty things. If you ever watch like Game of Thrones or read The Song of Ice and Fire, they're always eating things like lamprey pie and stuff.
Will they attach to humans?
No, they wouldn't, because my professor, when we caught these on the boat, he took one and he had like this rubber apron on because he didn't want to get fish cuts all over him. And he just put the lamprey like near his apron and like suctions on right away. But if you were like walking, they live in rivers and stuff too. If you're walking to the river and a lamprey like starts to suction onto you and starts to bite, you would know. You would just be like freaking out and you grab it off. Obviously, a lake trout has no means of getting it off really. Once it attaches, it stays attached for a while. It'll detach eventually and go find new prey. And often it can kill the fish or make it sick. And like I said, we caught lots of trout that had the wounds of lamprey in the past. A tick that burrows into the skin of an animal can cause infections and so forth, living off the blood of them. That's parasitism. Tapeworms that live inside of animals are parasites. There's lots of parasites that are very common. All right, so we said energy is not recycled in ecosystems. It basically comes in and gets used up to do various things, goes from one level to the next. However, materials, nutrients, and so forth are recycled in ecosystems. Okay? So materials are recycled, energy is not. Okay? And we talked about several cycles that you should know about. And decomposers are one of the organisms that are important in this cycle to return nutrients to the soil. So in ecosystems, water is recycled, carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus. Basically all materials in the ecosystem have a cycle of how they're used and how they return back into the ecosystem. Okay? Now, obviously oxygen and carbon have a cycle in that living things use oxygen for cellular respiration, release carbon dioxide in that process. Producers use carbon dioxide for photosynthesis, and then release oxygen. And so we have that simple cycle of oxygen and carbon. The water cycle, again, water is not used up ever. Okay? It's can be polluted in and unusable to humans and so forth, but it's constantly recycled. Okay. So for example, if it rains or snows, okay, precipitation, and then some of that water runs off, goes into streams, works its way eventually into other bodies of water, eventually to the ocean. Some percolates into the ground. Some of that, okay, gets used by plants. And then as plants use water through their roots, they release it through the process of transpiration out through their leaves, okay, through the stomates, and it returns back in the atmosphere, and then return. Water in lakes, ponds, rivers evaporates in the atmosphere and eventually condenses and falls back to the earth. So we have this constant cycling of water, but nothing really uses the water up. It's the same water we've had on Earth for all of the history of the Earth. It just gets converted from one form to another, used temporarily by different organisms, but it's always returning back to the cycle. Here again we see carbon cycle. In the carbon cycle, humans, we'll talk about this at the second half of this unit, release huge amounts of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere through the burning of fossil fuels. Okay. Plants can take in that carbon dioxide through photosynthesis. Okay. Primary consumers, first level consumers eat the plants to get carbon. Higher level consumers eat the animals, the first level consumers to get carbon. Eventually these things die. As they decay, decomposers return that carbon back into the soil. Okay. Detritivores, things like earthworms, can digest that. Respiration from all these organisms returns carbon dioxide back to the atmosphere, and this process repeats over and over. But again, the carbon dioxide is never really used up.
Why is carbon dioxide inorganic?
What's that?
Why is it inorganic? Why is carbon dioxide inorganic?
Because what's the definition of organic?
It has carbon in it.
Not just carbon.
Hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen.
No.
Or something.
Something's organic if it has what?
CH4.
Carbon and hydrogen.
What? The SAT didn't say that.
Yeah, the SAT book, it only has carbon.
What do you mean? Yeah, carbon dioxide is not considered organic though.
What is it? The SAT
The difference comes in because when you study organic chemistry, which is slightly different than how we talk about organic in terms of biology, organic chemistry is the chemistry of carbon-containing compounds. Nitrogen cycle is fairly complex. Most of our atmosphere is actually nitrogen. 78% of the atmosphere, what you're breathing right now is nitrogen, but you are unable to use it. You don't absorb any into your body. You basically breathe in air that's 78% nitrogen. You breathe out and exhale air that's 78% nitrogen without actually using it. Okay? Only some organisms are able to use atmospheric N2, nitrogen. Okay? And those things are generally bacteria, called nitrogen-fixing bacteria. They can take nitrogen from the atmosphere and fix it and transform it into a form that plants can use. I'll at least talk about this tomorrow. I don't have time to finish nitrogen cycle.